For this lecture, we are going to talk a little bit about visual aids. For this class, obviously, I'm sure most of you are probably going to choose to do some sort of a PowerPoint for visual aids. But again, like with everything else we've talked about, please remember that this class isn't just about getting through these speeches, but it's also about being able to successfully give speeches outside of class. So what is the point of your visual aids? It's exactly what it sounds like. It is something visual for your audience to see that helps to aid them in understanding your speech. Your visual aid is not intended to be your speech. You don't want it to take over your speech. You simply want it to be something that helps your audience understand what you're trying to convey to them. So function. A visual aid should reinforce or illustrate your main point, your ideas, main points, how many ever you have. But it needs to be a visual illustration or something visual to help reinforce these main points. It is a visual representation of your main points. So what are some types of visual aids? Objects. When we talk about objects, something I want you to think about, remember, we're not just thinking about for this specific class, but we are thinking about much broader. Let's say I want to give a speech over the history of the gel pen. And I have my gel pen, and I'm talking about my gel pen. This is not a very good visual aid, whether it be recorded like this or in the classroom. You want an object to be something that can be seen really well. Perhaps you are doing a speech over the history of a guitar, or you're just talking about it. An actual guitar would be an appropriate object for a visual aid because those are big. People in the back of the room are going to be able to see them. If it's being recorded, it's large enough for the camera to fully pick it up and to give good definition. Charts. Charts are great. Most people, not everyone, but most people do tend to be visual learners, and we like to be able to see what you're talking about. Especially if you're doing a speech that has a lot of different numbers in it. Perhaps you're giving a speech and you're talking about the opioid crisis in the United States, and you want to tell us how many opioid deaths happened every year for the last 10 years. A really great way to do that would be to use a chart of some sort. Graphics, drawings, these are also great because people like to be able to visually see things. We like that. Video clips. Video clips are really good visual aids, but you have to make sure to not overuse them because remember what I said just a little while ago. You don't want your visual aid to overtake your speech. So for this class, our speeches are 4 to 6 minutes. If you have a video clip and your video clip is 2 minutes long and your speech ended up being 4 minutes, well, that video clip was half of your speech. So that video clip has now basically taken over your speech, and it's not really your speech. It's just you talking about a video clip. PowerPoint, Prezi, and Powtoons. I do want to make sure I point out, if you're making a PowerPoint and you're using an Apple product, be aware of the fact that a lot of times these PowerPoints, they don't quite work the same way as they do with Windows type products. So make sure that when you download it, that it actually does download as a PowerPoint and not a PDF. You don't ever want to use a PDF in the form of a PowerPoint because they don't function the same way, they don't move the same way, they don't look the same way. Whiteboards, for example, In class, if you're in an on-ground class, we have a demonstrative speech. So these past speeches, one of the students showed us how to work a math problem. And you can do that on the whiteboard or using the overhead projector. So now we've talked about visual aids, but what are presentation aids? These are not the same as visual aids. So here are some examples of presentation aids that can make your presentation a little bit better, but they don't necessarily aid in understanding. Music, if you are doing a presentation over Led Zeppelin and you simply play some music, then that is a presentation aid. You've given us something to listen to. If you want it to be a visual aid, you would need it to either be an actual video clip or the music playing and perhaps a picture of the band. Sound effects, those can be great if you were doing, say, an informative speech over the Salem witch trials, or maybe Marie Laveau from New Orleans, the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. Maybe you want to throw some sound effects or some lighting in there to really set the mood. Those are great. But again, these are presentation aids and not actual visual aids. The same goes for audio clips. So keep these things in mind. Before we move on to all of this stuff, let's talk just a little bit more about making a PowerPoint. There are certain things you want to keep in mind when you're making PowerPoints. And this would also include Prezis or Powtoons because those are basically the same things. You want the smallest font to be no smaller than 18-point font. When you are looking at these, make sure you're thinking about people at the very back of the room being able to see what you're presenting them. When you're creating these PowerPoints, I want you to think more is better. And by more is better, more slides are better. So more slides, less information. Don't try to crowd too much information onto one slide, because our brains have a hard time processing when you put a lot of information on there. And we're going to automatically try to read it. And if you have all of this information on there, we're going to start trying to read it and figure out what you have up there. So think about less information, more slides, nothing smaller than an 18-point font. And also make sure you're really aware of what the slide background looks like. So clearly for this one, it's a blue background with white lettering. But what if it was a darker background? White lettering would still be okay, but black letters wouldn't. If there is a design or picture, make sure you're aware of that, because it may look really great on most of the slide, but then when it gets to part of the design, you end up losing what's being written. Now, I didn't make a lot of these slides myself. They were handed down to me when I first started teaching back in 2017. But I am a big fan of pictures and not just words. I think pictures really helps to draw us in. When we get into the persuasive speech, you'll see where I've kind of changed that up a little bit when I start talking about that lecture for persuasive speaking, and I've actually added some pictures in to kind of help out. But anyway, integrating. So pick what makes sense and what suits your topic. If you are doing a topic over why you shouldn't drink and drive, having pictures of kittens and puppies probably isn't going to really make sense, and it's really not going to suit that topic. What will be easiest to see and most effective? Again, easiest to see, no small text. Don't use teeny tiny little pins and expect that everyone's going to be able to see what you're talking about and what you're pointing at. That is not easy to see, and it's not really effective either. Now, if this is your most favorite pen in the whole wide world, you can take pictures of it and turn that into your visual aid. If you were in the classroom, you could use the Elmo, so the overhead projector, to make your pen bigger. There are ways to be able to use it, but just holding the pen and talking about it and how cool and all, that's just not effective. Discuss your visual aid as you show it. This is so, so important. Do not just like rush through. Don't be talking about the rain when you have a sunny day picture up. Make sure you're talking about your visual aid as your visual aid is being shown. And I already said, don't rush through it. Stay on track. I'm the world's worst about not staying on track, but try to stay on track. Here's another big one. So do not pass out materials. I know that we are tempted to do stuff like that. And by materials, that can also mean my pen. So for example, I want to talk about my pen, but I know you all can't see it, so I pass it around the room for everyone to look at. Here's the problem. You have my pen now. You're looking at my pen. You're no longer looking at me, which means you're no longer listening to me. If I were to hand out a recipe, you're all looking at the recipe and not necessarily paying attention to me. So don't hand anything out during a speech. Wait till after the speech is over. Again, the biggest thing to take away from this is remember that your visual aid is just that. It's something visual to help aid in understanding your speech. It is not meant to be your speech. So whatever you do, don't let it overtake your speech. It is your speech, not your visual aid's speech. With that, this is the quick little visual aid lecture. As with everything else, if you guys have any questions for me, please make sure that you email me and we will try to get them taken care of. Hopefully you guys learned at least a little something. I know this one was a pretty quick one, but again, questions, make sure you email me.